Greetings, my scattered sisters and brothers in the Lord. Trust you know the Lord is with you wherever you find yourself scattered today, and that you know that his presence with you is more than enough for whatever you might face today. We are towards the end of Mark chapter 8, and you know that all through the first 8 chapters of Mark, the big question is, who is Jesus? That he has such authority. And finally, Jesus just turns to the disciples and says, okay, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ. For the first time, Peter recognizes who Jesus is, that he's the Christ, that he is the Messiah, that he is God's anointed one to bring God's kingdom. And so this is kind of a milestone in the Gospel of Mark. And so at this point, Jesus begins to teach the disciples how he's going to bring the kingdom of God. He's going to do it by going to Jerusalem and suffering and being handed over and being crucified. And on the third day, he'll rise. And so when Peter hears this, that Jesus is going to bring God's kingdom through a sacrificial death, Peter says, no way. He rebukes Jesus. In Peter's mind, God's kingdom doesn't come through the Messiah getting crucified. God's kingdom is going to come through the Messiah leading some type of victorious military conquest. And so Jesus rebukes Peter, and he tells Peter, get behind me, Satan. You don't have in mind the things of God. You have human concerns and human ways in your mind. And that's where we're at. And now Jesus is going to talk to his disciples and to the crowd that's following him about what it means to be one of his disciples, about what it means to be one of his followers. And so we pick it up at Mark chapter 8, verse 34. Then Jesus called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple, whoever wants to come after me, must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for you to gain the whole world, yet forfeit your soul or your life? Or what can you give in exchange for your soul? If any of you are ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of you when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. And he said to them, truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see that the kingdom of God has come with power. And so Jesus is teaching them that he's going to his cross, and that's how God's kingdom is going to come, is through him going to Jerusalem and being crucified. And if they want to participate in God's kingdom, if they really want to be with him in this project of God's kingdom coming, then they're going to have to take up their cross and they're going to have to follow him. And so it's going to require sacrifice. It's going to require commitment and putting Jesus first ahead of their own desires. And so I think about this from a couple of ways. You know, at first it sounds very costly, and I don't want to deny that it is costly. But just think for a moment about costly things that we're called to. I mean, if you want to excel at something, it's going to take sacrifice. And sometimes you hear people talk about their career and how they have sacrificed everything for their career. Sometimes you hear about different scenarios where somebody says, the only way I accomplished this was through sacrifice. And then you might be kind of left questioning, wow, well, that's great that you got all that, but was it really worth the sacrifice? You know, was it worth sacrificing time with your kids? Was it worth sacrificing your marriage? Was it worth sacrificing, you know, all the different things that you may have sacrificed in order to achieve that? And so we live in a world where, you know, we're no strangers to sacrifice, and we're often left scratching our heads, was the sacrifice really worth it? Well, Jesus is saying, I'm going to be crucified to bring God's kingdom. And if you're going to be one of my followers, if you're going to be in on this, then you're going to have to take up your cross too. And you are going to have to sacrifice. But here's the thing. With Jesus, the sacrifice is absolutely worth it. That it's worth it to be part of the kingdom of God and the fellowship that's there and the life that's there and the peace and the joy. And so if you're going to come after me, it's going to take sacrifice. You're going to have to die in terms of your own desires. You might have to die literally in terms of being loyal to me, but it's worth it. That's how you'll actually receive God's future and be part of the future that God is bringing. And if you try to hold on to your own life rather than give your life up, you're actually going to miss out. You're going to miss out on the kingdom. You're going to miss out on God's future. You're going to miss out on the peace and the joy of God's kingdom. And so, pretty radical call. Well, again, we live in a world where there's a lot of radical calls, but a pretty radical call, and what makes it distinct is that it's about following Jesus. And Jesus is the one who brings God's kingdom, God's future, God's victory. He does it in an upside down way, but as we surrender to him, as we sacrifice, we actually receive. We receive life, we receive joy and peace, and we receive a share in God's future. So wherever you find yourself scattered today, kind of think for a minute, am I really following Jesus? Am I following to the point to where I sacrifice? Am I following to the point to where I live surrendered to him? And as we surrender and make whatever sacrifices are required in that surrender, we actually have a share in God's future, and the kingdom is coming. God bless. Have a great day. May God grant you the grace to follow well. God bless.